Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Beyond Identity webinar. I have once again invited Bob, our practicing CISO, to chat with us today about a super exciting topic of recent attacks. We have a lot of content to get through, so I do want to get you guys to the good stuff. If you have any questions, you can drop it in chat, and one of us will respond to you as needed. So, our topic today is recent attacks, everything you need to know about what happened and how to defend against it. We'll talk through the sort of patterns, we'll do a little bit of a future looking, and we'll end with a fun little exploit demo, which you should definitely look forward to because I really like them. Okay, so to start off with, I just wanted to highlight how frequently these large-scale attacks are happening, right? From late 2024 to basically end of February timeframe, we've had a series of really serious exploits and attacks that have happened. Interestingly, a lot of them leveraged against telecom companies globally. So let's dive into each of them and see what we can learn here. The first one is NTT. They're a Japanese communications company. The breach exposed nearly 18,000 corporate clients' information. So, Bob, what can you tell us about what happened here?
Yeah, so this looked like a pretty standard telecom breach. We don't know all the details yet because they haven't shared it. But as best we can tell, they detected it pretty quickly and reported on it. If you go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. Again, this is, we really can only speculate, but clearly there was an initial access breach, which is probably exploiting an unpatched customer-facing portal or using some kind of stolen credential. On that primary device, they probably dropped some kind of tool to penetrate the system, then move to some other situation where they had persistence. Maybe they modified the registry keys or scheduled some kind of task or job. And eventually, maybe they exfiltrated some other credentials and moved laterally to the second device, eventually achieving or depositing some long-term piece of software that enabled command and control execution to exfiltrate a lot of the client's information. Yeah. Now, this looks like a pretty standard exploit, as I'm sure they'll publish more information, but it's probably going to follow this general pattern.
For sure. So when you talk about a general pattern, something else that also really caught the newswire's attention is not a Japanese telecom, but some US-based telecoms, including Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. So tell us about that set of breaches and the bad actor behind them.
Typhoon basically has been targeting telecommunications and infrastructure in the United States and across a lot of across the world really, but we'll talk specifically about some of the infrastructure in the US. We believe that the country of origin is China. The suspected leadership is the Ministry of State. It's been going on now since 2020. It's a fairly sophisticated attack. Again, targets US telecommunications. We have proof that AT&T, Verizon had breaches. The general toolkits they use, I'm sure people have heard of these, are JumblePath and GhostSpider and other MSS-linked implants. JumblePath is what gets dropped early on in the attack vector so that you can load more sophisticated tooling such as GhostSpider that enables long-term command and control and reconnaissance. And generally, what they're doing is they're attacking those edge devices, which typically are older and have well-known vulnerabilities. Once they get a foothold, they move laterally very quickly and then start exfiltrating some key data. If you go on to the next slide. Mm-hmm. The two major breaches that we've seen or that we're going to talk about today is the U.S. Department of Treasury. Again, this was the attribution was tied to Chinese threat actors, particularly Typhoon, and then also global telecom intrusions of Verizon, AT&T, and also some of our allies, Italy, South Africa. And this exploited, again, the same flaws in the Cisco systems. At least that's what's believed. And we'll talk a little bit about why vulnerability and patch management is so critical. What's notable about these campaigns is no malware was initially required. So they basically were able to breach the systems. That's the initial access tactic. And per this attack, Typhoon, they remained undetected for months because the tooling has become sophisticated enough that it can evade detection for quite some time.
Yeah, I actually, interestingly, CrowdStrike published their global threat report a few weeks ago. And in there, it said there were 79% of detections in 2024 were actually malware free. And, compared to 2019, 40% was malware free, right? So why do you think bad actors are moving away from malware? Malware still works, right? So why are they moving away from it?
I mean, malware works quite well. It's just the detection techniques, the detection side has gotten more sophisticated, particularly some of the more sophisticated EDRs and XDRs are more adept at detecting that malware. And the reason they moved, and so what a lot of the threat actors have done have moved more towards phishing campaigns and credential access abuse, invalid account abuse, which means because those are very difficult to detect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What about that?
All good, all good. And speaking of a telephone, why do you think bad actors are so interested in telecom companies?
Wow. It's such a rich collection of information. When you go at the telecom, all kinds of communication is going through the telecom ecosystem. There's law enforcement information, congressional information, any kind of communication that's going through there. They'll sit there and it's a treasure trove of all kinds of communication information. It's kind of an obvious target.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, it reminds me of how reverse proxy works, where they just kind of sit in the middle and they still let traffic flow through, but then they actually, like a phishing net, right, start capturing all of the relevant information that they're looking for.
And, and when you start thinking about when people they make a phone call between colleagues and they're going over an ATT infrastructure or whatever, Verizon, they don't consider that as secure. And so they don't think about securing the information. So it's a lot easier to slip up, right? It's not like they're communicating over some secure channel. So it's just a treasure trove of information.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense.
So let's dig in a little bit. This is the specific Cisco edge device exploitation in 2024 and 2025. Just dig in a little bit. So again, the initial access was achieved through vulnerabilities in the edge devices. There was no malware to penetrate it. There were some poorly configured systems, and there were some vulnerabilities that were years old. And this goes to, again, why the telecom industry, and you'll see legacy infrastructure and critical infrastructure is often targeted because those edge devices generally have very old software on them and legacy systems. They don't get updated and managed like our modern edge devices or our phones, right? So they exploited those. They then were able to drop some software, most likely Jumble Path, or some similar solution that was just a drop loader, which allows them to load information. They trick the user and it allows them to load that information into probably a valid process or something like that, or use a scheduled task to launch that. Once they have that footprint, that software's only role in life is to get loaded, delete itself. So it only has a footprint for a brief period of time and it's hard to detect. And then it phones home and starts executing what's called command and control. And then once they have that command and control, they can start loading anything. Mm-hmm. And that's how they kind of land and expand. It's just like how you would, if you wanted to sneak in somewhere, you would do the same thing. You'd first sneak in, figure out the lay of the land, and then invite all your friends in. That's kind of how it works with that persistence, command, and control. And then once they have that, and they're behind the initial defenses, and because oftentimes, and we'll see this with zero trust, with legacy systems, there's an implicit network trust. So once they're on their network, there's this implicit trust model that makes it a lot easier to move laterally. And once they do that, they're going to start dropping long-term solutions like Ghost Spider or something like that, which its whole role in life is to exfiltrate information and to stay there for a long period of time undetected.
Yeah, it's like kids breaking into a warehouse. They do a little bit of like scoping around and then they leave themselves a back door so they can get in easier the next time.
Change the
if it makes
logs.
sense,
Yep.
change the logs. There you go. If it makes sense to children, bad actors can make it work for them, right? This one caught me by surprise because I feel like I haven't thought about ADFS in a while, but I think that's just the luxury of me not being an IT admin, right? Obviously, there's some really large deployments of ADFS, even as organizations are trying to move to the cloud. So what happened here with this multi-year phishing campaign?
Yeah, so obviously ADFS is something you want to target because Microsoft is one of the most widely deployed software in the world, right? And so this is a rich target. And they believe that the country of origin is Russia. It's believed to operate by the Foreign Intelligence Service. They use a number of different toolkits, well-mail, potentially foggy web, magic web. And the whole purpose here is to basically use MFA or some way to get the initial access and then move software over to the ADFS servers so that they can then exfiltrate either certificates and or tokens so they can gain persistent access. And it's really amazing because a lot of the software that's been built, it's either when it finally gets onto the protected services where the authentication or the credentials are stored and authentication is validated, they can once they're on that system, the tools allow them either to scrape credentials off, pull off signing certificates, exfiltrate keys, or even more insidious is authenticate certain types of requests that otherwise shouldn't have been authenticated.
What do you mean? What types of requests?
Well, if someone actually comes in and they want to authenticate themselves, it goes back to the AWS.
Oh,
And then it's smart enough to intercept that and say, no, we'll let that person in.
got it. I see. That is very
Once
sneaky.
that core service is compromised, pretty much everything is open.
Yeah, this seems like a bad one. A multi-year phishing campaign that got revealed in February of this year. So, all right, now we're moving into more sort of fancy phishing land. This is where phishing kits, I always think, have really interesting go-to-markets. They have a product team, they have engineering roadmaps. It's a full-scale operation. Darcula is one of estimated about 2,000 Phishing-as-a-Service kits. What's interesting about Darcula? What is it that they do?
Well, first, this represents a real change in the threat landscape. Really, it's a Phishing-as-a-Service changes the whole, like I said, the landscape and the scope and the breadth of these attacks. But fundamentally, what it's doing is it's allowing less skilled adversaries to basically target in a very meaningful and sophisticated way multiple companies. And its primary goal is credential and financial information theft. But somebody using Darcula as a service, perhaps they're certainly less skilled than some of you more sophisticated people, now can target hundreds and even thousands of companies. And right here, you can see over here I have a generic Darcula-enabled APT. That's because now when you now have these services, it's not about the APT anymore because it can be anybody. Now anybody has that level of skill. Normally an APT represented somebody with a really, really deep skill set. And so you would learn who those are because they had the skill set and a lot of other people didn't. But now with these kinds of phishing as a service, it becomes less clear who's actually doing it, which is kind of scary. And like you said, there's thousands of these phishing as service solutions out there, although Darcula stands out. We can go to the next page. And this is, again, it's kind of like how our industry, the cybersecurity industry has evolved, where we've grown over time. We've added more and more feature sets, and we deliver that value to our customers. The same thing is happening in this threat environment. So they have more sophisticated access models, subscription-based, accessible via private Telegram channels. Kind of crazy. Someone can sign up with a subscription-based model to target people. They have hundreds of branded templates. Every phishing campaign's success is based on that initial access. And so the more relevant and customized those templates are, the more likely you're going to snare somebody. They have all kinds of reverse proxies, which normally used to be kind of an esoteric art. Now they're reverse proxy on demand. Anybody can configure them. You can set them up, and you can start extracting session cookies and tokens. If you look over at the right-hand side, my guess is probably everybody on this webinar has received some kind of similar SMS message, which talks about you've got a delivery, you need to click on this. I probably get one of these every week or two. Infrastructure, again, it used to be an art to build the infrastructure necessary to do this. Now it's on demand. It's all done for you. And finally, as we'll see in the evolution of these things, the dynamic site generation, real-time relay of credentials, it's becoming highly automated. Guess what? We'll see in a minute. But what comes after the automation? AI. Once it's automated and you drive it with AI, you're really in trouble. I think you're on mute, Jen.
Oh no, I'm on mute. I was gonna say I actually had a package got delivered, and I think I get these every week as well.
It's
But
crazy.
yeah, once you automate it, it's scalable, and it's a
Yep.
scale for bad actors. For good people,
That's right.
is scary.
Yep. We'll just jump through this really quick. It looks pretty standard, a chat chain, and you'll start to see some patterns with initial access, credential access, and command and control. We'll call that out at the end. But I think the key thing here is the reconnaissance is probably the most important part, because that determines the effectiveness of the campaign. And then once you do that and you get somebody to click on it, the phishing links are delivered. And if you get their credentials or their tokens through attack in the middle, then pretty much everything is up for grabs.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty scary nowadays with all of these phishing kits. Now it's time for patterns and trends. We walked through, I think, 4 or 5 different attack patterns and different bad actors. There's some common TTPs that really start surfacing, right? And you know what they say, 1 is an outlier, 3 is a trend. And you can see here, basically every attack had valid accounts, unsecured credentials, and 3 out of 4 had utilized spear phishing as a technique. So, Bob, I know, as a CISO, you're thinking about this. And do you think at a larger scale, are you seeing regulatory bodies respond to this level of scale at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see the influence across the board. You see that with a lot of the digital identity work that's been done in NIST, where they're trying to nail down exactly what it means to have authentication assurance, identity assurance. That's key. That's driving a lot of the security that we do here, in particular, phishing resistance. What does it mean technically? You've seen it across the board with the zero trust architecture. NIST push for zero trust architecture is all about creating an ecosystem where valid account takeover and or unsecured credentials are just fundamentally eliminated. By eliminating basically implicit trust, you can avoid the a lot of the salt Typhoon scenarios where edge devices themselves, once you're breached, you're in their network, and the implicit trust allows you to move laterally pretty effectively. And then, of course, a lot of the NIST, just in general, a lot of the NIST specifications and controls are all driven by this. Or at least I shouldn't say driven, they're responding to this. And I think more recently when we did our PCI DSS 4.0, you can actually start to see the influence there as well.
Yeah.
I think what you'll see over time is these regulatory, but there will be a few regulatory bodies that take the lead because they're technically the strongest. And I think we kind of know where that's headed with NIST and is kind of driving a lot of this. And a lot of the other regulatory bodies are going to reference them as their core set of controls and then specialize it for their specific industry.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's probably a positive ripple effect if everyone sort of aligns with best practice, right? I love this view of the sort of evil ecosystem. I don't really know what to call it, but it basically tracks from 2012 to present day how the sort of cyber attack ecosystem has evolved. share with us what we're actually seeing here, what the trends are.
Yeah. So at big picture, TLDR is that you're seeing the evolution very similar to how we've seen the evolution of software in our industry, the cybersecurity industry, where initially we came with very specific technology that then manifested itself in certain components and kits and libraries and tooling, moved very quickly to automation, and then we saw an explosion of services, access as a service or SaaS services, and you're seeing that same movement with this and the threat landscape. As they become more sophisticated, they're moving away from deeply technical point solutions to large scale threats as a service, whether that's malware as a service, phishing as a service, ransom as a service. These are all moving to as a service. And it's kind of scary because what they're doing, it's an ecosystem that's starting to grow very quickly. And it's an ecosystem it's evolving and innovating, much like our own cybersecurity industry. And what's behind all this is for sure is there's a lot of nation states that are invested in making sure this ecosystem grows, because it creates more disruption, more problems, and more innovation. So the analogy is, we've got a VC on our side, but then you have these nation state actors that are investing in this ecosystem because they get a lot of returns. And you can see we started on the far right-hand side where it was just root kits and basic exploit kits. And you'd have to be highly sophisticated and highly motivated to actually use that. And all the way on the right-hand side, low skilled, low motivation, low risk attacks can be executed in larger scale, and they can come and go very quickly.
Ecosystems are interesting, and I think you picked the right word for this particular slide, because the reason VCs love ecosystems is, they call it like economies of scale, ecosystem network effects, whatever you want to call it, right? But essentially, the logic is it doesn't just grow linearly. It actually grows exponentially once you've invested in an ecosystem enough. So there's a lot of money involved. And then for the bad actors, the innovation can compound upon itself to the point where this can really be executed at scale. And we haven't even touched AI yet, which actually I think that's our, when we look to the future, we see a lot of AI, don't we?
Yeah, we'll jump to this. Yeah, but that's exactly right. Where do you take the ecosystem? Well, the next logical step is, as AI continues to be integrated into phishing operations, you're going to generate, it's all going to become dynamic. There's going to be blurring between real and fake. We're seeing that with deep fakes all over the place. There'll be autonomous campaigns, which means just the implications are crazy. If it's an autonomous campaign, AI driven, it's going to adapt. You'll give it it's like a genetic algorithm. You'll give it an outcome you want, and as it starts to attack and explore and look for vulnerabilities, it will adapt and it'll drive the outcome. And then there's going to be AI augmented everywhere. Cyber criminals will scale targeting with LLMs, the way marketers use CRMs. And then of course it's synthetic trust. You're not just phishing a person; you're phishing a machine they trust, or another device they trust, or you're impersonating a device, and then it becomes really, really interesting. But it's just going to continue to accelerate that change. Yeah.
So I think this is a good spot where we can kind of talk about what defenders can do, right? It's not doom and gloom. It's not that we are left with nothing in our toolkit, right? So what are some of the effective mitigation strategies that people can take to protect themselves?
No, that's right. So basically, this is tailored to what we talked about today, but I think everyone will recognize these as just best practices. The first and foremost, is vulnerability and patch management. If you have vulnerabilities, you have to detect them and you have to respond to them immediately. And a lot of the Salt Typhoon vulnerabilities could have been addressed or prevented had the vulnerabilities been patched in a timely fashion. Phishing-resistant MFA and credential-free access. This goes back to, you need to have phishing-resistant authentication everywhere, and you need to move towards a zero-trust architecture. We'll see that in a second. And this eliminates credential reuse through strong phishing resistance. It solves, and again, the common theme, across almost all of our scenarios was credential abuse or credential access and initial access. So it eliminates what the tactics of valid accounts in a large number of the spear phishing scenarios that we just saw today. And we'll see a demo in a minute. Device posture and configuration compliance. This is critical too. Again, if you go back to some of the edge devices that didn't have proper device posture and or configuration, and that opened it up. And it also goes to making sure that your security model isn't static, it's dynamic. And what the configuration compliance does is if your system drifts from a default secure configuration, you're going to know. And so it's not a point in time. My configuration is good on January and I'm going to check in 6 months. It has to be real time and it has to be dynamic. Least privilege and just-in-time access. This is all about lateral movement, and it ties a little bit about the zero trust as you move through your ecosystem. You don't have, again, no implicit trust, no boundaries everywhere within your ecosystem. You have to have restricted, if someone does get access, they only have access to a specific narrowed item for a specific time with a specific context. I put zero trust in here again, because as an overarching architecture, it covers all your valid accounts, unsecured credentials, external remote services. And this is really kind of a design principle. All the kind of, when I look at it, zero trust architecture is a commitment to moving from everything that's moving detection activities to prevention activities. I mean, basically, have your architecture solve your security problems and not your security operations team. And finally, phishing detection and awareness training. There's some controversy about how effective this is, but as a CISO, you have to commit to training your individuals on what secure looks like and how to behave securely. Because secure by design is both an architectural decision, an operations decision, and a behavioral decision. So that's pretty, and these are all in the order that I would start on.
Nice. That's helpful. You don't have to worry about quickly taking screenshots. We'll send out the deck after the webinar. All right. So let's actually see a demo of an exploit, so you can really feel the ease of these phishing kits, right? It's one of my favorite things to watch. And as I talk through this, I'm sure Bob will have commentary as well. Let me just make sure that I have everything set up. Okay, here we go. So it's a normal day in the office. George is an accountant, and he got an email that says, hey, our Q1 financial summary is ready to be reviewed. If you could open it and review it, right? Pretty standard email. Nothing looks too suspicious. I should have said too fishy. But actually what's happening here is somebody's done their reconnaissance, right? This is, if you remember the attack chain, somebody knows that George is an accountant. It's the end of Q1, and he might want to take this action. So once George opens this document, what you're going to see is the execution of a attacker in the middle exploit. And this is specifically using reverse proxy, using EvilGenX. So before I get into it, can you just remind the audience how a reverse proxy works?
Good question. So I think the analogy would be, if you and I were having a conversation normally, face to face, we would trust I would know you would know me, and we'd trust everything we would say. But imagine if we were having a conversation by dropping a letter in a box, and then you would pick that up and you would write a response, drop in the box, and you'd expect me to pick it up, but we would never see each other. That's kind of how it works on the internet. But imagine if somebody then had access to that box and they could change anything you said or anything I said. I wouldn't know that I'm talking to Jane. Jane wouldn't know she's talking to Bob. So basically, that's what a reverse proxy is. It gets inserted between you and the destination that you're trying to communicate with, whether it's Microsoft 360, whatever application. And once they're in the middle and you don't know they're in the middle, you don't know who you're talking to.
Right. And they don't want themselves to be known, right? And that's what makes them so insidious. So let's see what's actually happening here, right? the attackers running EvilGenX, which is an open sourced phishing tool, they are sending off this email, and George, unbeknownst to him, opens the email thinking, I'm going to go edit this document. He enters his password, and this is where the magic starts to happen, or whatever the opposite of magic is, right? I don't know if you can see very clearly down here, but what the phishing kit has actually done is it's captured the username and the password in clear text. That is not good, right? And you might say to yourself, but wait, my Microsoft environment has a second factor. This is a common setup, number match. George says, yeah, I do this every day. So he picks up his phone and he enters his number and proceeds with authentication. And he's confused. He's like, maybe it didn't work. I will just try it again or talk to Vlad. It's all good. But actually, what's happening in the background is, if you remember how the bad actor was able to capture the username and the password, here, the bad actor saw the MFA prompt and then captured the authentication tokens. That's actually a really bad situation, because now the bad actor is going to copy over the cookie, open a browser, and drop the cookies in there. There we go. And they're in. What I want to call out here is, if you notice, when the bad actor logged in, he did not put in a password, even though he had it, and the system did not prompt him for a second factor. So I actually want to pause there for a second. Bob, why did the bad actor not need to go through sort of the normal credential second factor flow?
Yeah, so the whole purpose of the initial engagement in using MFA is to generate that token so that subsequent access doesn't require authentication. Imagine if we had to authenticate every single time our browser made a request to the back end. It may make 5,000 requests just to render a page. So that is why the token needs to be generated. It's a, however simple the initial authentication is, it's still, with respect to the operations that happen between the browser and the server, it's still a high friction flow, and it's a slow process. Once you get that token and it's handed out, it's basically just implicitly trusted. So that token is handed. It's like you got a smart card, or you got somebody's ID or somebody's license. Now, as long as you have that, you are now perceived as being Jing, until that token is dismissed. And even worse, that token now can be used by any browser. Depending on the level of sophistication of the server, that token can be used anywhere by any browser, anyhow. Or, I'm sorry.
That is scary. That seems like the worst case scenario, right?
It is.
So, I'm talking to a CISO, right? That sounds like a bad idea. So what I want to quickly show you is what login looks like with Beyond Identity. We are phishing resistant by default. There's no phishable factors in the user's authentication flow or in our architecture. And we deploy a whole host of controls in the background, including device-bound credentials, as well as dynamic continuous device and user risk evaluation. So now this is what login would look like. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to provide my username and click next. And it's going to start logging me in. So first, it's confirming my biometric, that I am who I am. And then what you didn't see in the background is a public-private key authentication, right? So the private key never leaves the secure enclave. The user never has to look at the URL to make sure that they're not being reverse proxied. We have a security feature called verifier impersonation resistance, right? Where we validate that the origin of the access request is actually legitimate before allowing authentication to proceed. And I actually don't want to show you the entire flow here, because very excitingly, we have a webinar coming up in about a week or so where you can see the entire platform in action. And we'll go into all of the sort of technical nitty-gritties and the security characteristics of Beyond Identity. So to end our time here today, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us, Bob. This would not be the same if it was just me blabbering. If you want to learn more, we have a whole collection of phishing exploits on our website with explanations for you to explore. And as I've mentioned before, you can join us for a Beyond Identity dedicated demo on April 22nd. And since you're here, a little preview, we are announcing our FedRAMP authorization certification in a few days here. So if you want to kind of understand what that offering we have for federal is, you can join us for a webinar later in April as well. So thank you so much for your time. And until next time, bye.
Thanks.